When street lamps first lit up a sleeping city. A 1912 night to remember a quiet world before the glow long before neon signs blinked above bustling avenues or headlights streaked across midnight roads. There was a time when nightfall truly meant darkness. In the spring of 1912, a sleepy city, nestled between river bends and low hills, slipped each evening beneath a heavy velvet sky. As the sun faded, shutters closed with gentle thuds. The warm yellow light of kerosene lamps leaked through window panes, casting fragile pools onto dirt streets. Outside those pools, shadows reigned deep and absolute. Please subscribe my channel, press the bell icon. Imagine standing on the cobblestones as the last ember of twilight disappears. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and damp earth. A horse-drawn carriage rattles by, its lantern swaying like a lone firefly. Somewhere far off, a dog barks once, then silence folds over the city like a thick quilt. This was a world where the night was not just an absence of light. It was a living presence, a quiet companion that dictated human rhythms. Shops closed early, for there was little reason to stay open after dark. Bakers rose before dawn, rather than risk working by a flickering flame. Families gathered around small tables, sipping tea or broth while shadows flickered on plaster walls. In those dim rooms, conversation softened. Voices dropped as if respecting the hush beyond the windows. Children dozed earlier, their dreams guided by the faint hiss of an oil lamp and the creak of timber beams cooling in the night air. The streets themselves seemed alive in their darkness. Without electric glare, the heavens stretched endlessly above, vast rivers of stars, so bright they appeared close enough to touch. Every so often, the silver of the moon slipped free of drifting clouds, tracing rooftops in a cold, silent glow. Footsteps echoed longer. A simple walk home could feel like a journey through a cathedral of shadows. Travelers often spoke of how the darkness shaped the senses. Without light, ears sharpened. The trickle of a distant stream, the whisper of leaves, or the rustle of a stray cat sounded magnified. Even smells, freshly baked bread cooling on a sill, or the tang of coal smoke from a chimney, felt more vivid. To live, then, was to understand the night not as an obstacle, but as a constant companion, sometimes daunting, sometimes tender. For many, this darkness was also a keeper of secrets. Lovers shared hurried kisses in alleyways, concealed by shadow. Farmers whispered weather predictions to one another outside taverns, their breath rising like smoke in the chill air. A single lamplighter might make his rounds, his long pole igniting gas lamps one by one until the streets held small, trembling islands of amber. But beyond those modest flames stretched a vast, mysterious black. It is easy now, in our world of constant illumination, to forget how darkness once shaped the pace of life. Nightfall meant rest, reflection, and sometimes fear. It encouraged families to draw close, for outside was a world unseen. Storytelling thrived in such conditions. Grandparents recounted tales of spirits and ancestors, and fishermen spun yarns of strange lights on distant shores. The absence of light opened a space for imagination to flourish. On this particular evening in 1912, the city lay expectant without realizing it. The day's markets were long closed. The last trolley had clattered to its depot. A thin fog rolled in from the river, wrapping corners and doorways in gauze. Cats prowled silently along fences. Above, the stars burned with the ancient indifference they had shown for millennia. But hidden among rooftops and alleyways were hints of change. Wires stretched taut between poles, unfamiliar metal boxes bolted to walls. A quiet revolution was sleeping, ready to awaken. A lone night watchman made his rounds, lanterns swinging from his hand. He paused on a bridge overlooking the water, breath steaming in the cool air. Perhaps he thought of his children asleep at home, their small faces lit by the glow of a single oil lamp. Perhaps he wondered about the rumors, about how tomorrow the city's streets would be as bright at midnight as they were at noon. He could not yet imagine the hum of electricity or the way light would spill across cobblestones, erasing shadows that had lingered for centuries. Even in this hushed moment, the city's identity was wrapped up in the darkness. The bakery smelled sweeter at dawn because it was earned after a night's deep silence. The church bell at sunrise felt holier when it followed hours of absolute stillness. To illuminate the streets was to rewrite the rhythm of life itself. As the fog thickened, the watchman resumed his walk. A cat darted across his path, vanishing into a hedge. In distant houses, shutters rattled softly in a breeze. The world was waiting, calm, unaware, and perhaps a little reluctant to let go of the old ways. This would be the last night the city belonged entirely to the stars. Tomorrow, when the street lamps flickered on for the first time, people would marvel, cheer, and stay awake a little longer. But tonight, for one final evening, the city's heart beat to the slow, ancient rhythm of darkness, a rhythm that cradled humanity since the beginning. Section 2. The arrival of electric dreams. Morning broke with a crisp golden light, but whispers of last night's preparations lingered in every corner shop and bakery. The townspeople had heard the rumors for weeks. A modern marvel was coming, one that would stretch invisible veins of power through the city's bones. Some spoke of it with excitement, others with doubt. Electricity still felt like magic, a force too wild and invisible to trust completely. The wires had gone up quietly, strung across rooftops and alleys while most slept. Utility workers, men in wool coats and leather gloves, had climbed poles under watchful eyes, fastening glass insulators like jewel-toned beads. On this particular morning in 1912, merchants inspected the fresh metal posts that now lined their cobbled streets. They ran calloused fingers over bolts and wondered how light could possibly travel through copper. In the city square, an elegant poster announced, "Tonight, first illumination of our streets. A new era begins." Shopkeepers paused beneath it, murmuring to one another. Some were hopeful. An apothecary with spectacles perched on his nose imagined safer walks home for his wife. A tailor considered how late-night customers might boost his trade. But an elderly candlemaker frowned. Her family had sold wax tapers for generations. What would happen to their livelihood if the darkness itself could be banished? As the day wore on, children pressed their noses to windows, staring at the curious new lamps. Their iron posts gleamed faintly in the sun, each topped with a globe of frosted glass that waited silently for dusk. To them, it was as if a row of tiny moons had been planted in their city. By mid-afternoon, the streets buzzed with an energy that was more than anticipation. Vendors shouted louder. A brass band rehearsed in a distant park, their notes floating on the breeze. Even horses seemed to trot with an extra flick of their tails. Something monumental was about to happen. Behind closed doors, city officials gathered nervously. The mayor, a stout man with a salt and pepper mustache, paced beside the window. "If this fails," he muttered to his aide, "they'll call me a fool who gambled the city's treasury on a fad." His aide adjusted his bowler hat and replied, But they'll call you the man who brought daylight to midnight." Outside, in the late afternoon chill, women in long skirts and men in newsboy caps strolled toward the main boulevard. Mothers urged their children to dress warmly for the evening spectacle. A local newspaper boy hawked a special edition with the headline, "The stars will have competition tonight." As the sun dipped lower, a cold breeze swept through the streets, carrying the scent of river water and coal smoke. Gas lamps flickered for what might be their final service. A hush began to settle, a communal breath held in anticipation. Then, at the stroke of 7, a city engineer wearing a clean, pressed suit approached the main switch. A small crowd gathered behind a rope, craning their necks to see. He gripped the lever, his hand trembling slightly, and with one decisive pull, The age of darkness in this city began to fade. At first, nothing happened. A murmur rippled through the onlookers. But then, a low hum, almost imperceptible. One globe flickered, then steadied. Another followed, then another, until a cascade of warm, steady light spilled across the cobblestones. Gasps turned to cheers. The brass band struck up a triumphant march. Children squealed and pointed at their once shadowy street, now glowing like midday. Old men removed their caps in silent awe. Even the skeptical candle maker stood frozen, her weathered hands clutching her shawl. For the first time, the city's corners, once home to lurking shadows and whispered fears, were bright and safe. The transformation was astonishing. Storefronts seemed more inviting, their signs gleaming. The river, once a dark ribbon, now sparkled where the lamps reflected off the gentle current. Lovers, arm in arm, found themselves strolling a little slower, savoring the miracle. Stray cats blinked at the brightness and retreated to quieter alleys. For many, the moment was not just about light. It was about possibility. If a switch could summon a sun at will, what else could be achieved? Conversations swirled with dreams of electric streetcars, glowing billboards, and even homes free of smoky chimneys. The watchman from the previous night stood beneath a new lamp, lantern dangling forgotten at his side. He tilted his head back, studying the globe's steady glow. A part of him mourned the quiet partnership he had shared with the darkness. But another part, perhaps the larger part, felt relief. No longer would he patrol blind corners, uncertain of who or what might lurk beyond his light's reach. Above them, the stars continued their ancient watch, but now they shared the sky with a man-made constellation. The city, once a humble outpost in the vast dark, now announced its presence boldly. It was as if humanity had reached up and plucked a piece of daylight, daring to keep it for themselves. The band played louder. Vendors began selling roasted chestnuts to the growing crowd. A group of young boys raced down the boulevard, their laughter echoing against the shop fronts. A woman whispered to her husband, "It's like the world woke up in the middle of the night." The city was alive in a new way. Its streets no longer the domain of shadows, but a stage for dreams waiting to be born. And though some hearts held a pang of nostalgia for the quiet dark, most felt only wonder. The arrival of electric dreams had begun, and there was no turning back. Section 3. Shadows that refused to fade. The first night of electric brilliance carried a giddy euphoria, but by the second evening, a few cracks began to show, small, quiet reminders that not every shadow would surrender. Under the new lamps, corners of darkness still clung stubbornly between buildings and beneath stoops, as if reluctant to let go of their centuries-old dominion. The glow was strong, but not absolute, and for some citizens, that incompleteness was oddly reassuring. In an alley near the tailor's shop, a group of boys gathered to whisper about the ghosts they were sure would now be easier to see. "Look," one said, pointing to the edge of the light where fog curled thick and gray. "They're hiding there, waiting for the lamps to go out." Their giggles were half serious. Electric light had not banished their imaginations. Instead, the new brilliance made the remaining dark pockets seem deeper, more mysterious. Older townsfolk noticed something else. The city didn't seem quite as quiet anymore. The steady hum of electricity, faint but insistent, had replaced the soft sigh of night wind and distant crickets. To some ears, it was thrilling, a reminder of progress. To others, it felt intrusive, as if the city had traded whispers for a ceaseless, invisible chorus. The candlemaker, still clutching her shawl from the night before, stood at her window and watched the boulevard. She could see her grandchildren laughing beneath the lamps, their faces glowing with wonder. But she also saw her shelves of unsold tapers, their wicks waiting silently for hands that might never come. Light had always been her family's business, passed down through generations, and now it seemed the world had outgrown her craft overnight. Meanwhile, in the mayor's study, The man who had flipped the switch the previous evening sat with a glass of brandy. Cheers and congratulations had followed him all day, but now, alone with his thoughts, he stared out at the glowing streets. Progress was intoxicating, but it carried weight. Would the city lose its quiet nights of stargazing? Would late hours bring mischief that darkness had once discouraged? Change was thrilling, yes, but it was also unpredictable. The watchman, whose lantern now seemed almost obsolete, found himself lingering near the riverbank. The new lamps reached the water's edge, but could not tame the deep shadows beneath the bridge. He stood there, listening to the gentle lapping of water against stone, feeling a strange mix of comfort and unease. The darkness there seemed older than the city itself, untouched by wires, switches, or human ambition. Elsewhere, couples strolling beneath the lamps discovered a new kind of intimacy. The half-lit streets created pockets of semi-darkness, places where whispered conversations felt secret even as the boulevard gleamed nearby. Lovers leaned against brick walls, tracing letters into each other's palms, still finding privacy between pools of light. The new illumination had not erased longing or tenderness. It had merely shifted where such moments unfolded. Children, too, were adjusting. The youngest among them were unaccustomed to seeing their city so alive after bedtime. One small girl peeked out her bedroom window, eyes wide at the golden glow outside. She wondered if the world was now awake all night, and if so, did the stars mind sharing their stage? She whispered a shy good night to the sky, unsure whether the heavens could still hear her through the electric haze. The shopkeepers observed changes in their own rhythms. The tailor experimented with keeping his shop open later, stitching under the steady brightness that didn't flicker or smoke. The apothecary noticed more customers stopping in after dinner, encouraged by the safe glow on the streets. But fatigue crept in. People stayed out longer, conversations stretched past midnight, and mornings came quicker. Progress, it seemed, had stolen a little sleep. Yet the most telling sign that some shadows refused to fade came from the outskirts of the city. Beyond the reach of the lamps, the old paths to farms and forests remained as dark as ever. Farmers still lit lanterns to check on their animals. Hunters still relied on the moon's silver guidance. In those untouched places, life went on as it always had. The electric glow was a miracle, but it was not omnipotent. It could not tame the wilderness or banish the night beyond the city's edge. As the evening deepened, fog rolled in again, curling around lampposts like cautious fingers. The golden globes created halos in the mist, and for a moment, the city looked enchanted, half in the old world, half in the new. A group of young men, returning from the pub, stopped to watch the lights shimmer through the fog. One of them, tipsy and sentimental, murmured, "It's beautiful, but somehow lonelier, isn't it?" His friend shrugged, unsure whether to agree. In homes across the city, as people climbed into bed, they left curtains slightly open, letting the strange new glow seep inside. For the first time, night was not absolute. It was no longer a wall, but a translucent veil, one that could be pushed back by human hands. Yet, as their eyes drifted shut, the ancient darkness still lingered in their dreams, reminding them that progress could light the streets, but not every corner of the soul. Even with the street lamps blazing, the city was still learning a truth that would echo through the decades. Some shadows are more than the absence of light. They are memories, fears, and mysteries that no brightness can erase. And in the quiet spaces between the lamps, those shadows waited patiently, refusing to fade. Section 4. Whispers beneath the wires by the third night. The novelty had begun to settle into routine, yet the city's nerves still buzzed like the wires stretched overhead. The lampposts no longer seemed like foreign intruders. Instead, they had become silent sentinels, standing watch at every corner. Still, the faint crackle of power overhead, a sound so new that many mistook it for distant insects, reminded everyone that this light was alive in a way no candle or lantern had ever been. In a narrow street where balconies nearly touched above, two neighbors whispered from window to window, marveling at the invisible current that now threaded through their world. "Imagine," one murmured, "little rivers of lightning running above our heads." The other nodded, her shawl pulled tight against the evening chill. She confessed a secret. The wires unnerve her more than the lights themselves. They hummed softly, a sound that seemed both mechanical and ghostly. Children began to invent stories about the wires. Some claimed tiny spirits raced along them, carrying lanterns of fire. Others whispered that if you listened closely, you could hear the voices of distant cities, the crackle of laughter and conversations riding the current like birds on a wind. Whether or not they believed their own tales, the wires became a kind of folklore overnight. The mayor, ever eager to present the city as modern and forward-thinking, commissioned a photographer to capture the skyline at dusk. The resulting image, black silhouettes of rooftops crowned with glowing orbs, would later hang in parlors and schoolrooms, a frozen moment of wonder. But beneath the pride, a few citizens felt an ache they couldn't quite name. They missed the stars. The wires and their halos of light blurred the constellations that had guided farmers, sailors, and dreamers for generations. The local astronomer, a quiet man who often spent hours on the edge of town with his telescope, noticed the difference immediately. Where once he could trace Orion's belt with crisp certainty, now the glare smudged its outline. He sighed, adjusting his lens, and reminded himself that progress always asked for small sacrifices. But when he returned home that evening, he felt as if a few ancient friends in the sky had been pushed further away. Meanwhile, a baker's apprentice discovered the lamps offered unexpected opportunities. No longer bound to the sun's schedule, he could deliver warm loaves to late-night taverns, earning extra coin. He marveled at how the city, once sleepy after sundown, now pulsed with small acts of life. The clang of a distant hammer, the shuffle of feet returning from a delayed errand, the murmur of couples lingering outside cafes. Not everyone welcomed this wakefulness. An elderly widow wrote a letter to the local paper, lamenting that the lamps steal the hush from the night. She missed the gentle embrace of darkness, the sense of being cocooned in quiet. Her words struck a chord with many who found themselves lying awake, curtains glowing faintly, listening to a world that no longer slept as deeply. In the stables near the city's edge, horses shifted uneasily under the electric glow filtering through the rafters. Accustomed to the rhythm of natural light, they stamped their hooves and flicked their tails at odd hours. The stable boy, half amused, half concerned, whispered soothing words to them, promising that the strange brightness was harmless. But even he could not shake the feeling that the world had tilted slightly, that the old rules of night and day had been rewritten. On the cobblestones, the watchman completed his rounds with a conflicted heart. His lantern felt heavier now, a relic from another age. Passing beneath the wires, he glanced upward, imagining the current humming like a distant song. He wondered if the city needed him anymore. But when he turned down an unlit alley at the edge of town, his lantern's glow pushed back the darkness where no wires reached. He smiled faintly, reminded that progress was not yet complete, and perhaps never would be. The candlemaker's grandchildren played a new game beneath the lamps, pretending the glowing orbs were moons they could summon at will. They stretched their arms wide, spinning in circles, their laughter mingling with the faint hum overhead. Watching from her doorway, the candlemaker felt a pang of melancholy ease in a something gentler. Maybe her tapers would gather dust. But perhaps light, any light, was still a kind of magic worth loving. Later that night, a poet scribbled by his window, inspired by the wire's faint music and the shifting shadows they created. His verses compared the electric hum to a heartbeat running through the city's veins. He wrote of whispers that live between progress and memory, of dreams illuminated yet still half hidden. As midnight neared, the city seemed to hold its breath. The wires stretched taut across the sleeping roofs like threads stitching the present to the future. The lamps burned steady, patient, and unblinking, but in the quiet corners between them, the whispers of an older world persisted. Somewhere in that balance, between hum and hush, glow and shadow, the city learned to dream again, even under its new artificial stars. Section 5. The Last Candle's Lament. In a small shop tucked between a tailor and a bookseller, the candlemaker's world was quietly unraveling. Her wooden shelves, once crowded with rows of hand-dipped tapers, stood half-empty, not because business was booming, but because fewer townsfolk came to buy them. The electric lamps had begun to rewrite habits that had lasted for generations. The woman, whose hands bore the faint scars of molten wax, felt the change as a soft but relentless erosion, like water smoothing stone. She still rose before dawn to melt beeswax in her copper pot. The familiar scent, sweet, earthy, and faintly floral, wrapped the shop in memories of winters past. As she dipped the wicks again and again, she thought of the candles that had accompanied births, vigils, and whispered prayers. Each taper had been a small, flickering witness to joy and sorrow alike. Now, she wondered if anyone would notice when they disappeared. That evening, she lit a single candle in the front window, as her mother had done before her. Its gentle glow wavered against the pane, fragile beside the steady electric light spilling in from the street. Outside, passers-by barely glanced at it. The street lamps outshone it entirely. The candlemaker felt an ache, not of anger, but of mourning. Progress wasn't cruel, it simply forgot. Elsewhere, the city bustled under its new canopy of brightness. A group of boys raced down an alley, playing a game of tag while past their old bedtime, their shadows chasing them like loyal companions. A newspaper editor worked late, grateful for the lamps that let him proofread without straining his eyes. Lovers lingered on park benches, savoring the rare privacy offered by a city too distracted by its own glow to notice. But in the corners where candles still burned, altars, bedside tables, quiet studies, there was a softness the new lights couldn't mimic. The flame danced and breathed, alive in a way electric bulbs could never be. One elderly priest, closing up his chapel for the night, paused to watch a row of votive candles flicker before the Virgin statue. Their tiny, wavering halos seemed to him like the beating hearts of the faithful. "They are small," he whispered, "but they still matter." The candlemaker's granddaughter, no older than 8, sat cross-legged on the shop's floor, cradling a half-used candle like a relic. "Grandmama," she asked, "will people forget about candles now?" The old woman smiled sadly. "No, child. They'll forget for a while, perhaps. But someday they'll remember." She didn't explain further. How history's wheel often turned. How old things sometimes returned when the world longed for simplicity again. In another part of town, a seamstress closed her shutters early. She preferred the way a single candle softened her workroom's edges, making the spools of thread gleam like pearls. The street lamp's stark light felt too sharp, too revealing. Under candlelight, even mistakes on a hemline seemed less harsh. She hummed a lullaby as she snuffed the flame, content with her small rebellion against modernity. A young man walking home from the tavern paused outside the candlemaker's shop. The candle in the window caught his eye, its glow warmer than the electric halo overhead. He remembered his grandmother's farmhouse, where the only light at night had been a single taper on the kitchen table. For a moment, standing there on the modernized street, he felt like a boy again, safe, small, and loved. He almost stepped inside to buy a candle, but the hour was late, and habit led him onward beneath the humming wires. In a rented attic room, a writer scratched out a line in his notebook. "The last candle does not rage against the lamp. It sighs and tells its stories." He thought of the lamplighters who once climbed ladders at dusk, their small flames marking the city's heartbeat. Now, a switch somewhere else in town replaced their ritual. But perhaps, he mused, stories and memories would keep the candle's spirit alive, even if its wick burned no more. Midnight approached, and the candlemaker extinguished the lone taper in her window. The street outside remained bright, indifferent to the gesture. She climbed the narrow stairs to her bedroom, the smell of wax lingering like a lullaby. As she drifted to sleep, she imagined a future where someone, somewhere, would light a candle. Not out of necessity, but because a steady, quiet flame still spoke to something ancient in the human soul. The city outside continued its electric dream, but in the silence of the candlemaker's room, the old world and the new existed side by side, if only for a heartbeat longer. Section 6. Midnight Under New Stars by Midnight. The city had transformed beneath its unfamiliar canopy of light. Streets that had once disappeared into darkness now stretched like silver ribbons between rows of glowing lamps. The sky above was still speckled with stars, but their brilliance seemed gentler now, washed slightly by the electric glow below. A faint hum from the power lines accompanied the night air, a new kind of lullaby, mechanical yet oddly soothing. At the corner of Market and 3rd, an elderly lamplighter named Elias stood, hands in his coat pockets, gazing upward. For 30 years, his nightly climb up wooden ladders had been a ritual, striking a match, shielding the flame from wind, coaxing the old gas lamps to life. Tonight, his ladder leaned untouched against a brick wall. The lamps no longer needed him, yet he lingered, as though the city might still ask for his steady hands. He wondered if the stars themselves felt a touch dimmer now, overshadowed by man-made brilliance. Across the street, a small cafe kept its doors open later than usual. The owner, a widow named Marjorie, wiped down tables while the faint crackle of a phonograph filled the air. She paused to watch a pair of young lovers walk by, their faces softly illuminated. Marjorie's late husband had courted her under gaslight, the old-fashioned kind that flickered and sputtered. She whispered to the empty cafe, "You would have liked this, Thomas. How bright and alive the city feels tonight." Down by the river, a group of dockworkers gathered after their shift, leaning against crates and marveling at the lamps reflected in the water. The city's skyline shimmered as though new stars had descended to earth. One of them, a burly man with calloused hands, murmured, "Feels like we pulled the heavens down for ourselves." His friend replied, "Aye, but don't forget, the real stars are still watching." They laughed quietly, but a hint of awe lingered in their voices. A few blocks away, children who should have been asleep chased one another through a cobblestone alley. Their laughter rang clear, echoing between brick walls as their shadows danced and stretched beneath the steady glow. In another time, darkness would have called them home. Tonight, light gave them permission to stay out a little longer. A watchful mother leaned out a window and smiled, choosing not to scold them. This night felt too rare, too magical to interrupt. Inside a modest apartment, a young man sat by his window with a sketchbook. He had dreamed of being an artist since boyhood, but work at the factory consumed his daylight hours. Now, with the city lit like a stage, he could finally study its shapes. The sharp angles of rooftops, the gleam of rails, the way lamplight softened the edges of stone. His pencil moved quickly, capturing what he knew would be remembered as a turning point, a city no longer ruled by darkness. In a nearby churchyard, a group of owls shifted in their perches, their world altered without consent. They watched as light carved away the shadows where they once hunted. The smallest owl blinked, confused, as if to ask the moon whether this was a passing storm or a permanent change. The moon offered no answer, merely bathing the scene in silver, patient as ever. Elias, the retired lamplighter, began to walk home, his boots clicking softly on the stones. Passing under one of the new electric lamps, he stopped and reached out, his fingertips grazing the cold metal pole. It hummed faintly, alive in a way his gas lamps never had been. He imagined all the nights he had climbed ladders, match in hand, and wondered whether progress always felt a little lonely to those it left behind. Far above, a train whistle echoed across the city, carrying with it the promise of speed, and modernity. The lamps and the train belong to the same world, a future rushing in, irresistible and relentless. And yet, as Elias turned a corner, he noticed an old woman lighting a single candle in her window, the small flame defiantly warm. For a heartbeat, the world felt balanced. The new stars above, the old flame below. In a boarding house on the outskirts, a poet stirred from half-sleep, drawn to the window by a strange brightness. He pressed his forehead to the glass, watching the lamps stretch like a constellation across the streets. He whispered into the quiet, "We've stolen the stars, and yet the night is still the night." He scribbled the thought into a notebook, knowing the city's transformation would inspire many voices, not just his own. Midnight deepened, and the city breathed under its new glow, restless yet comforted, unfamiliar yet wondrous. The electric stars would never blink like the old ones, but tonight they sang their own lullaby to a city learning how to dream in light. Section 7. Conversations beneath the glow. As the clock passed 1 in the morning, the city's hum slowed, but the street lamps kept their silent vigil. Pools of amber light stretched across cobblestone streets, connecting corners that had once been swallowed by darkness. People who might never have lingered outside after sunset now found themselves reluctant to leave the quiet magic of this new world. On a narrow side street, 2 university students, Clara and Edmund, sat on a bench beneath a lamp that buzzed faintly with life. Clara cradled a notebook in her lap, pages filled with observations about the night, the changing shadows, the ripple of lamplight on windows, the way the world seemed more accessible now. Edmund leaned back, watching a moth circle the bulb in a hypnotic dance. "It feels," Clara whispered, "like the future is finally here, like the city has woken up." Edmund smiled. "Or maybe we're the ones waking up." He traced the patterns of the brickwork beneath his feet. "Do you think we'll tell our grandchildren about this night?" "Only if they don't laugh at us for thinking light bulbs were magical," she replied, grinning. A little farther along, a lamppost cast its glow on a chessboard perched atop a barrel outside a closed cafe. 2 elderly men, regulars of this impromptu chess club, played their last game of the evening. They'd been at it for decades, often retreating early when the darkness grew too heavy to see the board. But tonight, under the electric light, their pieces gleamed like polished ivory. One of them chuckled, "Guess we don't need to quit at sundown anymore." The other moved his queen decisively and added, "Progress has extended our rivalry." In another part of the city, a seamstress named Lillian stepped outside her small shop to breathe in the cool night air. The faint scent of oil and machine grease from her work clung to her hands, mingling with the fresh breeze. She looked up at the glowing lamps and felt an unexpected swell of possibility. Perhaps now she could take on late-night projects without straining her eyes by candlelight. Perhaps the world had just grown a little bigger, its boundaries stretched by these threads of light. At the river's edge, a young couple shared a whispered conversation. The lamps reflected off the water, doubling the stars above with stars below. They spoke of dreams, his of opening a bookstore, hers of traveling to Paris, and marveled that their city now felt cosmopolitan, as if it were finally part of the great, modern world. She traced her finger over the iron railing and said softly, "We've stepped into a story that someone else might read about someday." Meanwhile, in a smoky tavern tucked between warehouses, a group of dockworkers gathered around a scarred wooden table. The lamp outside sent slivers of light through the dusty windows, illuminating their tired faces. They debated whether the change would bring safer streets or just encourage more mischief at night. "It's strange," one said, "how something so small, a light, can change how you see your own neighborhood." His friend nodded. "Makes you wonder what else is waiting to change." Across town, a young boy named Samuel pressed his nose to his bedroom window pane, refusing to sleep. His parents had told him the city would look different tonight, but he hadn't imagined it would be this breathtaking. The streets outside glowed like paths in a fairy tale. Samuel imagined himself walking those paths as an explorer, every lamp a guiding star to some secret adventure. He decided he would remember this night forever. A gentle wind picked up, rustling the leaves of elm trees that lined the boulevards. The lamps cast shadows that swayed like dancers on the brick walls. In a quiet square, an old priest sat on the church steps, fingers tracing the beads of his rosary. He watched as a stray cat prowled confidently beneath the lights, no longer hidden in darkness. The priest murmured a prayer of thanks, not just for the light, but for the feeling of safety it brought to his flock. In the distance, a lone violinist played beneath a lamp near the train station. The soft, melancholic tune carried through the crisp night air, echoing off stone facades. Passers-by slowed, drawn by the sound. A woman wrapped in a shawl dropped a coin into his case and whispered, "It's as if the light itself wanted a soundtrack." The violinist simply smiled, his bow gliding gracefully as the lamps gleamed overhead. These quiet conversations between lovers, friends, dreamers, and strangers were threads weaving a new fabric of city life. The electric lamps did more than banish shadows. They created spaces where people could linger, connect, and dream under their steady glow. The city wasn't just brighter. It was more alive, as if a single night had extended its heartbeat. Far above, the stars continued their silent watch, sharing the sky now with these man-made suns. The universe, vast and ancient, remained unchanged. But down on Earth, beneath the humming filaments of 1912, humanity's story had turned a luminous page. Section 8. Echoes from other cities. While one city basked in its new electric glow, the ripples of change were already spreading far beyond its borders. In newspapers across the continent, headlines marveled at photographs of these lamplit streets, each image a promise that the future had arrived. Readers in distant towns traced their fingers over the black and white pictures, imagining their own neighborhoods transformed into shimmering avenues of light. In Paris, a cafe on Boulevard Saint-Germain buzzed with conversation as artists and poets debated whether the soul of the night was being tamed. A painter argued that shadows made the city's secrets beautiful, while a playwright insisted that light revealed stories worth telling. Outside, the gas lamps of Paris flickered against the steady glow of electric bulbs being tested on certain streets, a symbolic handoff between centuries. The Seine reflected both worlds at once, the old and the new merging in soft ripples. Across the Atlantic, in New York City, a telegraph operator read aloud an article about the transformation taking place overseas. "It won't be long before Broadway is brighter than day," he mused to his colleagues. They nodded, picturing the canyon of buildings ablaze with light. Even in rural America, farmers gathered at general stores, the smell of hay and earth lingering in their clothes, to read clippings about electric marvels and wonder when their towns might join the modern age. In London, a group of suffragettes passing through Trafalgar Square paused beneath a test lamp installed by the city council. One of them remarked that the streets now felt safer for women attending late meetings or returning home after rallies. "Perhaps light is a kind of freedom," another whispered, her voice trembling with a mix of hope and defiance. The lamps weren't just about technology. They hinted at a shift in the very rhythms of life, in who could walk where and when. Far to the east, in Tokyo, a young engineering student named Hiroshi examined sketches of electric grids and city plans. The flickering paper lantern on his desk seemed suddenly quaint. He envisioned Japan's streets alive with brilliant light, a sign that the nation was embracing the future while honoring its traditions. In Moscow, under the winter sky, a group of merchants discussed the cost of installing electric lights along Nevsky Prospect. Even in the snow-dusted silence, ambition glowed like a hidden ember. Meanwhile, letters traveled slowly, but the idea of electric street lamps traveled faster, in dreams, in whispered conversations, in the imagination of people everywhere. A woman in a small fishing village in Ireland read about the lamps in a crinkled paper and imagined her children walking safely home after dusk. In Cairo, a scholar sipping mint tea envisioned electric light illuminating ancient alleys where history itself seemed to sleep. This was more than a technological leap. It was a subtle reshaping of culture. In Berlin's smoky beer halls, workers joked that the bosses could no longer claim darkness as an excuse for shortened shifts. In Buenos Aires, tango musicians speculated that illuminated plazas might draw larger crowds to their late-night performances. In Cape Town, an innkeeper considered extending her hours, thinking of travelers who would now find her establishment even after sunset. The echo of that single city's lamps reached even farther, into the minds of inventors dreaming up brighter filaments, into the hearts of writers crafting poems about moonlit streets now rivaled by human ingenuity. The world felt smaller, its distant corners connected by a shared vision of light pushing back the unknown. But not everyone was without hesitation. In a countryside parish outside Vienna, an elderly priest fretted aloud that the lamps might keep parishioners awake longer, their prayers neglected in favor of late-night revelry. In a Swiss village, an innkeeper worried that artificial light might drive away the stars, those faithful companions of travelers. The future was thrilling, but it stirred unease, too, a reminder that every leap forward casts new shadows. Back in the lamplit city of 1912, a foreign journalist wrote in his notebook, "This is not just progress. It is an invitation to imagine." He understood that the story wasn't only about the wires or the bulbs, but about the people in distant places already feeling the tug of tomorrow. Above all, the electric street lamp became a symbol, a silent ambassador traveling on ink and whispers, promising that no place on earth was too remote to be touched by the modern age. A single night's glow in one sleeping city had sparked a quiet revolution of expectation across continents. As the lamps hummed on, their light was no longer confined to the city streets. It lived now in the hopes of distant dreamers, in cafes and farms, on riverbanks and mountain paths, a reminder that even the smallest flicker can send ripples through the world. Section 9. The science behind the magic. Beneath the gentle hum of the street lamps and the awe they inspired, there was a hidden world of science quietly at work. To the casual onlooker, the lamps seemed almost supernatural, tiny suns suspended above cobblestone streets. But behind every warm glow was a story of filaments, currents, and human ingenuity that had unfolded over decades. The heart of each lamp was a slender thread of tungsten filament. Before tungsten, early experiments used carbon or even bamboo, which glowed but burned out quickly. Tungsten, dense and durable, could endure the heat without surrendering to it. When electric current passed through, the filament resisted just enough to heat to an incandescent temperature, emitting a steady golden light. The glass bulb surrounding it wasn't just a vessel. It was a sealed sanctuary, drained of most air to keep oxygen from devouring the glowing thread. The wires snaking through the city's underbelly carried a silent river of electricity from massive dynamos housed in brick power stations. These dynamos were feats of engineering in themselves, huge spinning machines converting mechanical energy into electrical power. In 1912, many of these were driven by steam engines, their pistons pounding like the heartbeat of progress. Coal, the era's lifeblood, was shoveled into furnaces, releasing heat that boiled water into steam, spinning turbines that birthed electricity. But the magic didn't stop with generation. Transformers, another quiet innovation, stepped the voltage up for long-distance travel, then down again so that lamps would glow safely rather than explode. Insulators made of porcelain or glass kept the deadly current from leaping into wooden poles or curious hands. Underground cables, insulated with gutta percha or rubber, were carefully laid beneath the city like veins in a living body. Consider the switches and circuits hidden behind brick walls and iron lampposts. Each one was a gatekeeper, ensuring that a surge of energy didn't overload the fragile bulbs. Electricians, often unsung heroes, braved freezing nights to check connections, their lanterns flickering as they peered into manholes or climbed poles. A single loose wire or miscalculated voltage could plunge a whole block back into darkness. Even the shape of the lampshade mattered. Engineers experimented with glass textures, frosted for a softer glow, clear for brighter illumination, ribbed to spread light evenly without harsh shadows. Some lamps used mirrored reflectors to direct their beams downward, ensuring that the streets, not the rooftops, reaped the benefits. Physics itself was the silent partner in this spectacle. Ohm's law dictated the relationship between voltage, current, and resistance. Planck studies on blackbody radiation helped scientists understand why heated objects emit light. Maxwell's equations described the invisible electromagnetic fields that carried power through wires. In every flicker of a bulb, centuries of curiosity and discovery quietly converged. Imagine a young boy in 1912, curious about these marvels. Perhaps he borrowed a book from the local library, its pages filled with diagrams of circuits and glowing filaments. By the faint light of a lamp outside his window, he traced the wires with his finger, marveling that invisible forces could be tamed and guided to banish darkness. That boy might grow up to be an engineer or inventor, his dreams kindled by the steady glow outside his bedroom. Even the hum, barely perceptible beneath the city's whispers, was a clue to the science at work. It was the sound of alternating current oscillating, a faint vibration of energy leaping back and forth 60 times a second. To some, it was just noise. To others, it was the heartbeat of the modern age. The science behind the lamps was more than just technology. It was proof of what happens when imagination meets discipline. Each bulb represented hundreds of experiments, failures, and breakthroughs. Behind every glowing street was a lineage of thinkers. Alessandro Volta's first batteries, Michael Faraday's spinning copper discs, Thomas Edison's relentless trials, Nikola Tesla's visions of a world connected by alternating current. Their work had turned a city's night into a theater of light. And yet, to those strolling beneath the lamps, the science was invisible. They didn't need to know the mathematics of resistance or the chemical properties of tungsten. All they felt was the warm reassurance of light, the sense that the world was just a little less uncertain, a little more within their grasp. The magic and the mechanics existed side by side, one dazzling the eyes, the other quietly shaping the future. Even now, over a century later, when modern LEDs cast their efficient glow, the legacy of those first tungsten filaments lives on. Every time we flip a switch, we echo the discoveries of the past, proof that understanding the universe can turn dreams into reality. As the city of 1912 slumbered under its canopy of light, it wasn't just history being made. It was physics in motion, chemistry at work, and human perseverance shining through the night. The science behind the magic had turned darkness into opportunity, and for the first time, the world felt just a little more illuminated in every sense of the word. Section 10. The dawn of a new era. The city stirred beneath a quilt of stars and street lamps, its skyline a soft silhouette against the endless night. By the time dawn began to blush on the horizon, the lamps were still glowing, steadfast guardians of the sleeping streets. The cobblestones, once treacherous in darkness, now held the faint reflection of amber light, like captured fragments of the sun. Somewhere, a baker unlocked his shop early, the aroma of rising bread mingling with the cold morning air. He glanced at the lamps outside and smiled. His route to work had been easier, his world subtly transformed. That first sunrise after the city's night of light carried a quiet power. The residents who awoke to find their streets gently aglow felt that they had crossed a threshold. The lamps had not only changed the hours after dusk, but had altered their sense of possibility. It was as if the city had whispered to them in their dreams, "We are stepping into tomorrow." Children peeked out their windows, fascinated to see familiar corners no longer swallowed by shadow. A milkman, balancing bottles in a wooden crate, paused to watch a lamp flicker off just as the sun took its place. Shopkeepers discussed the electric glow as they raised their shutters, each conversation threaded with excitement. Longer hours, safer streets, and a sense that their city was now part of something grand. Newspapers that morning declared the event a triumph of human ingenuity. Headlines spoke of a city awakened and the end of darkness as we knew it. Writers waxed poetic, comparing the lamps to constellations stitched into the fabric of Earth. Even those who had worried about sleepless nights or the loss of starlight could not deny the marvel. The world had shifted, subtly but permanently. And far away, in cities and villages yet untouched by electricity, whispers of this transformation stirred ambition and longing. Merchants, mayors, and ordinary citizens began to dream of their own lamplit streets. The movement of progress was no longer abstract. It was visible, tangible, glowing above the cobblestones of a once sleeping city. The dawn of this new era was not just about technology. It was about imagination, the belief that tomorrow could be brighter, safer, and filled with opportunity. The street lamps symbolized a humanity unwilling to accept limits, a species determined to bend the natural order toward possibility. In the glow of those bulbs, people glimpsed futures where distance shrank, knowledge spread faster, and ideas traveled as easily as light itself. As the morning sun rose higher, the lamps one by one surrendered their glow. Their job was done for the night, but the world they illuminated had been permanently changed. The streets seemed almost reluctant to let go of their borrowed starlight, the cobblestones cooling as the day's warmth returned. But the memory of the night lingered. Children would recall it in bedtime tales, journalists in their articles, lovers in their letters. Generations later, when electric light became so ordinary that few paused to marvel at a street lamp, the echoes of that first night could still be felt. Every flip of a switch, every lit boulevard or distant lighthouse was part of a lineage that began with curiosity and perseverance. That night in 1912 was more than a technological milestone. It was a quiet promise that darkness would never again hold dominion unchallenged. The city's dawn was a metaphor, too. It reminded everyone that progress often arrives quietly, one small glow at a time. What begins as a fragile filament can ignite revolutions in culture, commerce, and imagination. In that sense, the street lamps did more than light a path through the darkness. They lit the path to the future itself. And so, as the day fully claimed the sky, the people of the city went about their routines, carrying with them a subtle thrill. They had witnessed something extraordinary, something their grandparents could scarcely have imagined. 100 years later, we might forget to look up at the lamps above our own streets, but somewhere deep in our collective memory, that first glow still flickers, reminding us of the moment the night itself was rewritten. Thanks for watching my video. See you in next video. Take care. Good night.